All right, everybody, this is Jimmy King over at Banking Bridge. We're going to get started with our webinar here in about 1 minute. Let some folks join, and we'll get started here shortly. All right, Trip, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm sharing my screen. You can see the screen, correct?
Yep.
Great. So got a great March webinar. Trip Jendron from Relcu. Trip is a longtime mortgage industry veteran, even though he doesn't even have one gray hair on his head. I don't know how he did that. So he's definitely got a wealth of knowledge. Wanted to bring him in, talk specifically kind of diving into lead buying, what's worked for him through his career. He spent a lot of time at Wyndham Capital before they were had their acquisition to SoFi. He's now with Relcu, is a CRM specifically built for mortgage, seen a lot of growth there, and thought he would be a great contact for everybody to better know who he is and some of the things he's worked on. So tell us, Trip, a little bit about your background, how you got into the industry with your different stops there.
Sure. Thank you, Jimmy. First and foremost, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me. Really looking forward to it. I think the world of you personally and Banking Bridge. I've used Banking Bridge in the past, and it was extremely valuable from a number of perspectives for us. And I'll talk through some of those aspects today as I kind of go through what worked and what didn't work for me in my past life, running marketing, technology, and strategy for a direct-to-consumer mortgage lender. But I wanted to thank everyone else that is participating in the webinar as well. I hope you guys get a lot of value out of what Jimmy and I are going to be talking through today. So a little bit of background on myself. I've been in the direct-to-consumer mortgage world for almost 20 years now. I started my career in the early 2000s at LendingTree. It was one of my first four after college, and got a really quick crash into all things direct-to-consumer lending with a lot of the pioneer lenders that were buying leads on the LendingTree network. I supported the Quicken Loans account for a little while. I was actually their first account manager. That was a big deal at the time. Like, obviously now Rocket, but learned a ton about what lenders were doing with acquiring leads, what strategies work, distributing leads to loan officers, communicating with leads, pricing strategies. Worked with 50, 60 lenders throughout my tenure there, and just learned a ton about all things direct-to-consumer lending. That was a really nice pathway into where I've spent the bulk of my career, which was working directly for a large direct-to-consumer mortgage lender out of Charlotte, North Carolina, Wyndham Capital Mortgage. They just got acquired by SoFi. Spent a little over 13 years there. Started in marketing, kind of stood up their business intelligence program, moved over into strategy, and then was running all of technology across the gamut towards the end of my tenure there. Purchased over 1 million leads at one point or another during the 13 years that I was there. Hope we converted at least 10,000 loans on this 1 million leads, or I wasn't doing a very good job of the acquisition strategy. Ran all of our contact center technology, sat hand in hand with loan officers for 8 or 9 of those years, figured out what worked, what didn't work. Got a really, really good purview into all things direct-to-consumer mortgage lending and mortgage lending in general. I've been at Relcu now for about 1.5 years. We're a fully unified CRM, focused specifically for so I've been able to apply that boots on the ground experience at a mortgage company and at LendingTree, and just the last 20 years that I've been in this world to developing a CRM that is going to work for loan officers and going to have the features and the functions that they really need. So looking forward to telling you more about Relcu, looking forward to telling you more about what we're doing at Relcu and where we're going in conjunction with what I've learned in the tenure that I've had in this business.
Great. Thanks for sharing, Trip. And if there's any questions as we go through the webinar, you'll see there's chat there. You can feel free to chat those, and we'll stop every few minutes, maybe every 10 minutes, and look through the webinar. So we're going to try to do cover 35 minutes here on the webinar, give you guys a nice outline of kind of high level what we feel like really on Trip side, and what a little bit of what I've learned of what strategies, if you're going to buy leads, what seems to be what you need to have in place to be successful for that. And I can attest to Trip. In the early days of Banking Bridge, I called on Trip, and you could hear in the background when you called Trip, all the guys making calls, all the people making calls. So he sat there on the floor close to the team that were talking directly to those customers. So diving into Wyndham Capital, which was super high volume, lots of money spent on acquiring leads, on technology. So tell us a little bit about when you think about when you're planning a media strategy, just out of the very first couple of things that you want to understand if you're thinking about spending money.
So yeah, you're ultimately developing a pro forma, right? So what do you want your volume targets to be, and how do you get to that volume, right? And that's going to boil down to how many loan officers you have, obviously, how many leads per day you need to feed those loan officers, and what that means for volume of leads. And then your biggest factor is going to be your projected conversion rates. If you haven't bought historical leads, you can project those out. But if you've been buying leads for a period of time, you're going to have those conversion rates. And you're going to know what type of leads convert at which levels. Are they purchase leads? Are they refi leads? Which states are they in? What's your LTV buckets? What your loan amount buckets? And you should be able to manage your filters that you're deploying with your lead providers in a way to come pretty darn close to what you want your conversion targets to be, and ultimately get pretty darn close to your volume targets as well. That also coincides with how many leads you need to feed your loan officers, keep them in their seats so that they're closing the volume that they need to close to be successful. And all those things that you're looking at work hand in hand. So you want to plan for that strategy, make sure that you're getting your media budget and your filters in place with your lead providers at the outset of each month, and you're monitoring the volume as it's projected each and every day of the month, and you're making changes as you need to drive the volume that you want. From a key performance indicator perspective, you're tracking a large number of full funnel conversions, right? And it starts at the top of the funnel. What's my lead to contact rate? And then from there, what's my lead to credit pull, application rate, right? And then from there, what's my lead to pre-approved customer purchase, or my lead to lock rate if it's a refi? And then what's my lead to approval rate? And then what's my lead to funding rate? So you're wanting to track your full conversions on any number of leads that you're buying as the month is progressing. And if you start to see your contact and your credit pull rate come down with an individual provider drastically, then you know that you need to potentially make a change and shift volume to a different source or a different area based upon your filter set. So full funnel conversion tracking to make sure that you're hitting volume targets is super important for making sure that you hit your monthly goals. The second big thing on top of conversions you want to track is your cost, right? So the more expensive the lead, the higher the conversion rate needs to be for your cost per unit to justify the spend, right? So if you're buying a large number of leads from a low cost provider, right, you don't have to have a really high conversion rate to get to a good cost per funded unit, but that does.
Oh, let's see here. Do I lose you, Trip? Trip, oh, we lost you. Oh no. There we go.
You got me? I'm sorry.
Yes,
I don't know what happened.
that's all right. That's all right. Let me share this again here. Hold on. Make sure we got you here. Yeah. So we were on key performance indicators. You were doing cost per contact, credit pull, lock, and funding.
That's right. So I think, again, I was saying the more expensive the lead, the higher your conversion rate needs to be to ensure that you're meeting your cost targets, right? And your cost per credit pull is obviously going to project your cost per lock, and then your cost per lock is going to project your cost per fund, right? So you want to make sure that you know what your targets are for each of those metrics on a by provider basis, and that you're tracking to those targets as you're managing your spend. So conversion rates is the biggest factor, and your cost per lead in terms of what your cost and unit economics are ultimately going to be.
And I would add to this, like what we see with the market changing in the last year and where we are today is cost per contact, to me, is a very good measurement in this market, because someone might be ideal, but they can't find a house. That's different than it was a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So if you can measure, these are great measures. The contact, credit pull, lock, and funding, those are really just, if you can just measure those four, that's going to open up a lot of eyes with where you're spending your money. So for me, cost to contact. And I think that's how many dollars do I have to spend to actually have a conversation with somebody? Is that what that is?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of ancillary metrics that surround these things, right? If you're doing a lot of outbound marketing automation, right? What's your engagement rate look like? What's your open rate look like in your email? Your response rate? What's your response rate look like on your SMS messages, right? But at the end of the day, your cost for your funnel conversions are some of the biggest things you need to keep an eye on. And you need to be comparing those to leads that I've purchased versus like direct mail leads you might be buying versus, digital marketing leads organically that you're generating. So you should be looking at those main measures across all of your main media outlets, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So technology from all, if there's the 3 or 4 main systems that you felt like you had to kind of have in place from when you're starting to spend a little bit of money. Let's talk a little bit about that.
So your LMS CRM is critical, right? You got to make sure that your loan officers have the tools and the visibility and the insights that they need to prospect and originate, right? And the goal for me was get them spending as much time in the CRM and the LMS as possible in conjunction with the contact center technology, right? Your POS is pretty critical as well, especially in the digital world. You want to make sure that as many of your customers that can leverage your digital application are leveraging that digital application as possible, right? You obviously need an LOS. You got to do findings and credit and deliver the lock loan and process and underwrite and all that good stuff. And then you obviously need your pricing engine, right? And there's a whole bunch of technology that surrounds those main areas that you can choose to deploy or not deploy based upon what your strategy, but those are your big areas that you're always wanting to optimize and integrate. That's the key. Like those 4 big systems have got to be very closely integrated so that you can get to that goal of the loan officer spending as much prospecting and originating as possible. Right? You don't want them doing a bunch of like LOS cleanup work and managing their pipeline for a good chunk of the day. They should be talking to new and existing customers to originate locks as much as they possibly can.
So if you, and just to be devil's advocate, but if you have an LO that says, man, I don't use CRMs, it's not my thing. How early do you have a conversation with an LO about the importance of the CRM?
Well, I think you get like, how are you prospecting? Like, how are you identifying new clients? How are you nurturing your past clients? How are you nurturing people that are looking for home? What's your plan then if you don't want to use a CRM, right? And you want to have that conversation early, and that's typically a conversation that you're having during the recruitment process. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk outbound strategy. So outbound versus inbound. It seems like Wyndham did a lot of outbound, but that strategy was to actually develop inbound over time. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. So you're buying a large chunk of the leads every month, right? And you might contact 55, 60% of those leads, right? So your goal is to leverage those leads as much as you possibly can to drive initial connection on outbound calls from your loan officers, and then continuously market to those leads in the form of marketing automations to drive inbound responses to your loan officers. And you can also do a bunch of additional marketing around that. You can do Facebook audience lookalikes using leads that you've converted successfully and start to drive more organic inbound as a result of that. You can do keyword search to drive inbound. You can do direct mail to drive inbound, but your technology has got to support both, right? You have to make sure that you're prioritizing, organizing your opportunities for your loan officers in a way that they can make really efficient, effective outbound dials, and they're getting the most out of that time, while in conjunction responding to inbound inquiries as quickly as possible as well. And inbound always trumps outbound in terms of like what a loan officer should be looking at on a daily basis. But your goal is to drive connections, and then your secondary goal is obviously to drive conversions on those connections.
Yeah. So inbound is more valuable than outbound. A lead, inbound email that you get from a prospect or a lead obviously is more valuable than you making an email to them. And then to set, like, what is outbound? Outbound is you have a team in your office or in your somewhere that is making outbound calls. They're a call center based model. Inbound is, like Trip said, it's the best one is direct mail. You're mailing out stuff in the hopes that they either submit through some sort of landing page or make a phone call into you, which would be more inbound, just to define those two. So lead sources and building out the funnel. There's the great thing about Trip is you name it, they probably have used that lead source over time or something very similar to it. So talk about what you guys manage from a loan officer perspective, all the sources that you used.
So I was typically feeding a number of loan officers during my time there. It was anywhere from 150, I think we had up to 650 or something at one point. But when you're supporting a large number of loan officers, you have to have a lot of different sources, because you have to ensure that you're able to acquire the leads, more importantly, in the segments that your company is going to be best suited to perform. And that typically means, like, what's your niche? What's your sweet spot? Is it A-paper conforming conventional refis? Is it first-time home buyer purchase people? Is it people that haven't had a real estate agent and you're going to use an internal real estate matching firm that you want to work with? Are you a portfolio, right? Are you a FHA, VA, Govy lender? Are you doing more low credit type stuff? Are you non-QM, right? So it was way more important to me that I was able to buy leads in the filters that I needed, where the prowess of our products and programs were. So, and because I was buying for a lot of loan officers, I had to have a lot of lead providers, because I wanted to optimize more at the LTV, the loan amount, the state, the purchase versus refi level, more so than the lead provider level. So you got to have a lot of sources to get the leads in the sweet spot that your company is going to be most likely to perform. If I had a lot fewer loan officers, that's easier, and I would focus just on a lot higher quality sources and a lower volume of leads. But it's a balancing act. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure you're feeding the right number of leads per loan officer per day in the segments that they're going to be most likely to perform, and that typically closely coincides with how your company's structured in your product and program mix. I mean, what did you try to match number of leads per LO? Was it like 8, 10 a day? Was it 2, 3 a day? What did you feel like a loan officer could manage? Well, that depends on a lot of things. Actually, we had a predictive dialer in my old company, so we were able to buy more because they weren't having to physically outbound dial the leads. They were more just like being fed connections on outbound dials that were happening behind the scenes. And there was multi-line dialing and a whole bunch of strategy that went into driving those connections into them. But so the goal for me more was like new connections per loan officer per day versus like number of leads per loan officer per day. And like, how do I back into the number of new connections?
Got it.
Right. And that fluctuated with the market, because when the market is really difficult, you typically have to drive more connections on a per day basis for them to get to a goal of 3 to 4 locks a week. The good people, the goal is like a lock a day or even 1.5, 2 locks a day. When times were amazing, we had loan officers that were doing 4 and 5 locks a day. Right. But at the end of the day, you need to understand like what your connection target is per day, your new customer connection target, and then what your connection to lock rate is, and then kind of back into the number of leads that it takes to get to your connection target and then your lock target. And that's all, again, getting back to the first slide of always monitoring conversions.
So you talked about, why did Wyndham have such success? Because you mentioned being able to match your niche, your best product, and your programs to those filter sets, and how important that is. Obviously, if you're not competitive in a specific filter or a specific product, then you don't want to buy leads based on that. And do you find that most lead providers should be able to match like whatever you're looking for? Most of them are there. How did you feel about that with matching what you guys were good with the lead provider?
So each lead provider is different, right? And they're going to drive different amounts of volume based upon their brand recognition and when and how they're marketing. And they're going to drive different qualities of volume based upon their brand recognition and when and how they're marketing. LendingTree was always a phenomenal lead source for me personally in the past, because they had 90+% brand recognition online. So they drove a ton of volume, and they drove it in the filters that I needed. And it was typically really high quality volume. The rate table providers perform really well for me in the past as well. And that's just because of how that model works. And I know we're going to talk about that in a minute or two. But it really depends on the lead provider. And if they're a smaller lead provider, they're running a lot of stuff through affiliates, typically they can drive some of the volume that they need, but the volume's not as good because it's affiliate volume. So again, that's why it's so important to measure conversion on the volume that you're able to get in the segments that you want by provider, and why I always had a lot of providers active, so that I could be really nimble with moving and changing my spend as the month progresses. We can tell their marketing as the month progresses. Sometimes they'll have more affiliates than others, right? Sometimes they're doing more organic search than others, and organic search performs a lot better than affiliate volume. So you just need to first thing you want to do is vet your lead providers, understand when and how they're marketing, right? What type of leads they're acquiring, what their strategy is, what their volume targets are, and only work with, you have to work with licensed lead providers. Obviously, that's a big one. Not licensed, then they're probably not worth much. So you really got to vet your lead providers. And then from there, you got to make sure you know how they're marketing. And then you got to monitor it to make sure that you're shifting as they're doing different kinds of marketing to drive volume as the months and weeks progress.
So having what's a lender needs to have the few things, there's lots, but the 3 or 4 things here is reporting is important. If you're going to get in the ad buying game, from what Trip is saying, is the number one thing he had you told me before this was you woke up every day, you checked the report. That was the first thing you did. Is that right? Yeah.
I had dozens. Analytics are everything.
Yeah.
Like every decision should be based upon the analytics. You can't wing it. You can't feel you've got to data. You got to trust the data, and then you have to share the data with your lead providers, because that can help you negotiate lead cost and the quality types that you're getting and your filter. So analytics are everything. If you don't have a good quality reporting strategy in place, you're probably not going to have a good media buy strategy.
Yeah. That's a great point. Is sharing the data with the lead provider. You think, well, why do I want to do that? It's because you can negotiate. And that's interesting.
Well, that and you keep them accountable. And they also know that you're watching everything, right?
Yeah.
So so it's accountability, and it's also negotiation, and it strengthens the partnership, because relationships are based on trust and transparency, and a lead provider, the media buyer, shouldn't be any different.
Yeah. Yeah. Right tech, hit on that. Start with lead management, which is your LMS, your lead management, your CRM. Those are kind of non-negotiables. Need to have those in place. And then we hear a lot about, with LO churn, and especially in a tough market, is you don't want to hire new LOs. It's tough to train people and bring people on. So if you can keep your LO churn low by buying quality leads, then you're going to have high morale. People are going to stick around longer. The system's going to work better. Did you guys see that as well? And you obviously were focused on quality to keep the LO churn low as possible. Is that right?
Yes, 100%. You may be able to get a much better cost per lock or cost per funded loan on a low quality lead source if you buy a lot of volume, but you're not connecting with people that applied for insurance or didn't apply at all or wrong phone numbers. And there's only so much they can do that on a per day basis.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you really got to buy them a good percentage of really high quality, high converting leads, even though they're more expensive, because you don't want churn. Right. You gotta drive the right number of high quality connections that they need on a daily basis. You can't do that if you're only buying large volumes of cheap leads.
Yeah.
And in that case, you also have to think about opportunity costs, because your cost per lock might be a little bit higher with higher quality, more expensive lead sources, but you're spending a lot more money on your loan officers to make those calls, and your profit might ultimately be lower. So you're having to manage your total profit with your unit economics, right? And the higher converting the lead, the more volume you're going to close, and as long as it's profitable on a per unit basis, you're going to drive more profit.
Yeah. Rate tables. I'm a fan of rate tables for several reasons, but what is your take on some of the pros and cons that you felt was a benefit to being on rate tables? Oh no. Trip should be hopping on. I'm gonna run through these questions while he hops back on here. So are we recording it? Yes. Trip, I want to hop through these questions here. What do your ideal conversion rates look like? So David asked that question. Trip, if you whenever you hop back on, we'll go through that. And then, can we get your best leads con war story? So Neil has probably an inside joke for Neil. I would, from a conversion standpoint, from the banking bridge side, and Trip, you can hit on this, but what was like an ideal conversion rate? It was a lot of different lead providers that you had, but was there kind of like one that you were looking for, maybe like a bank rate lead or a LendingTree lead that you felt like there was a conversion rate that you were measuring against?
I'm not trying to skirt the answer, but it really depended on the source and what you're paying for the leads for the source.
So like
right?
a rate
if
table,
you're paying a lot more on a per lead, like if you're paying $100 plus per lead, your conversion rate better be at least 6-7%. Right. If you're paying $10 for a lead, it can be 1% or even less. Mm-hmm. Right. So it really depends on how much you're paying for the lead and what you want your unit economic targets to be. And at the same time, what you need to sustain to ensure that you're hitting your overall lock volume.
Yeah.
Right. Because you need to look at your blended.
I think Trip's running out of bandwidth. He'll hop back on here. So strategy and conversion. So if you, and when Trip comes in, we'll hit this one as well. So you have, your lead management, which is what your LOs are kind of living in, your lead management system, your CRM every day. So you have your outbound and inbound lead management, which is predictive dialer. It tees up those leads for your LOs, your allocation optimization. I'll let Trip kind of hit on that. And then you have, again, measuring a lot of those analytics that you need to make sure that you're generating the ROI. And then obviously prioritizing and nurturing those leads is a key, because we see it all the time. We look at website visits. It's usually that third or fourth website visit that is going to convert that person. The value of having rates in your website is because it gives people reason to come back and increases the chances of them revisiting, which increases your chances of converting. With nurturing, you may not hit them on the first phone call. You may not hit them on the second phone call. It might be a text message. It might be an email a week from now. So making sure you have those nurture campaigns set up in there. And then under SMS, a lot of our customers have used or are pushing into SMS. It seems like it gets a much higher engagement than email. So definitely spend the money to get a good SMS system in place. Verse.io is a good one to check out. They do a lot of compliance in SMS, so they can get you squared away there. And then You've got, I like the activity feed. So if you're in your CRM and you're thinking, what do your LOs need to be looking at every day? It's that activity feed, which usually gives you open rates, gives you clicks, gives you scheduling clicks, so that you can see which leads are your most engaged leads in your CRM activity feed. And then you have the LO branding. Trip, give me a little bit about how you guys handled LO branding.
So LO branding for us was super important, because when you're branding for your loan officers, you're ultimately branding for the enterprise simultaneously. And we found that customers are much more likely to engage with an email from a human being or SMS from a human being than they were from some general enterprise company, right? And the loan officers actually appreciated it, and you have a better retention rate when you're automating branding on their behalf and helping them build their portfolio in conjunction with your company's portfolio. So we did find a lot of value in your tools in this regard, Jimmy, because every loan officer had a Banking Bridge rate forward website. They had a Banking Bridge calculator page. They had a bunch of tools that they could send out to allow for customers to monitor their rates. Mm-hmm. So the more you can brand for themselves, having to do much, the better off you're going to be as far as retention and engagement from your customer base as well.
Yeah. Well, pushing into the compensation, I think that's what most people are interested in, is how did you manage comp if it feels like in today's market, it's pushing towards this direct to consumer model, if you even call that, but it's like a blend between retail and D2C. How did y'all talk about the compensation structure?
So we typically looked at by how the lead was driven into the loan officer, right? A lead would typically pay less. A lead purchased from a non-rate table source would typically pay a little bit more, and then a referral would ultimately pay them, right? And the ultimate goal or story for the loan officers would be build your career on your leads, right? And just because you're making a third of the basis points or a fourth of the basis points in a rate table lead doesn't mean that can't be a future customer or an ability to drive referrals for other they know, right? So like every lead is an opportunity regardless of how you're getting paid. Mm-hmm. And if they close that rate table lead, then down the road, if rates improve and they refi, that's a referral, right? And we were doing a lot of automation on their behalf in that regard as well. But typically the way that we looked at it is the easier it was for them to fund that loan, the lower they got paid. So we're pumped all, and the ultimate goal for the more experienced LOs was to wean them off of leads over time, because they have this massive book of thousands of customers that they have acquired over years of working leads, and we're doing so much remarketing to those people on their behalf that they're just fielding inbound inquiries throughout the day, right? And then they're getting paid on portfolio retention, which is referral-based compensation, and there's a good pathway that they can see as a younger loan officer. If I just continue to put my work in over years, I can get all this high volume, higher basis point compensation loans, right? But it was typically the harder it was for them to convert the type of lead that it is, or whether or not they generated that lead on their own is what dictated their comp.
Great. If there's any comp questions, feel free to throw those in chat. And Trip, you can check chat to see if we have anything in there. And then we talked about a lot of things that do work. So what are some of the things that the basics here that don't work? If you're going to go if you're going to spend money on buying leads, here's kind of what you don't want to do. Talk a little bit about these, Trip.
Well, one thing that hasn't been working is my connection to this webinar. I apologize everyone for that, but I keep getting this message from whatever app this is, Jimmy. That's kicking me, and this is the only thing I have open, so I don't know what's going on. But anyway, if how many hours do we have? There's a lot I know that doesn't work after 13 years of working directly for a mortgage company and technology. But obviously, follow-up is everything, right? If you have a poor follow-up strategy because you don't have the to facilitate that follow-up strategy in terms of how you're organizing and presenting opportunities to your loan officers, you're going to be in a pretty tough spot, because you're going to spend a lot of money on leads that don't work, because you're losing those opportunities to lenders that have a great follow-up strategy and great technology. That's dovetail into the next point, which is don't cut corners on your tech, right? Especially if you're going to be in the D2C world. You got to invest in the tech to make sure that you're converting your leads at the highest level possible. And if you don't have the tech behind it, it's going to be really difficult to compete with the lenders that do.
Yeah.
Give lead providers some time, make the switch. I typically give it at least a week or two after I make a change to see how that change worked out, or 100 to 200 leads to see how that change worked out. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Give things time to bake a little bit before you decide that it's a failure. And then we already touched on this a little bit earlier. Just getting a lot of leads doesn't mean that you're going to close a lot of loans. Typically, the more volume you can get from an individual lead provider, if they don't have a brand, like the finger in the air test would say that they're doing something shady to drive those leads, which means they're going to be low quality.
Mm-hmm. And that's typically not going to change. If the first 100 are bad quality, it's not like the next 100 are all of a sudden going to be great. That's usually an indicator of what's to come, right?
That's right.
Okay. So you're saying 100 leads is for anybody that's thinking, I want to get in this game, you can get, if you're paying $60, $70, $80 a lead on average, up or down, you're spending $8, $10 grand. You really need to have that ready to spend to learn if this source is worth it or not. If you're only going to spend $2 grand, it's really not worth spending that money. You need to be willing to stick with it for however long it takes to get to about 100 leads. So think about that from a dollars perspective. So talk, your top LOs, you guys had a number of top LOs there working huge volume, very efficient. What did you see that they did well?
Well, I'm probably preaching to the choir in a lot of these, but because a lot of these seem to be self-explanatory, but seeing them in action is a different story, right? But the loan officers that typically plan their work and work their plan did a really good job. They knew what their hot list was. They worked the system the way that wanted the system to be worked, and they weren't trying to cut corners or figure out a way to beat the system, if that makes sense. They just embraced it and worked through the leads and the priority that we gave, did what they needed to do as far as the follow-up strategy, make sure that they responded to every inbound inquiry as quickly as possible. So again, it's just daily consistency, self-discipline, and putting the hours in, right? There's no skirting, doing the work. And they were self-disciplined to do the work. The second big thing that they all did really well was the ones that did the best job of listening to the customer needs, empathizing with them, and tailoring the loan options and presenting them accordingly, kind of your spend-based selling approach, their conversion rates on their credit pulls, because the customer knew that they were putting together the option that was meeting the very clear needs that they identified and goals for their particular loan. So listen, empathize, and present your options accordingly. Through transparency was super important as well. A lot of the loan officers that just gave honest answers and were presenting rates really clearly and transparently, and talked about rates as it pertains to goals again, and were just honest and transparent with their communication, had a much better time of building rapport and ultimately converting connected conversations into locks. Every connection matters. What that means is even if that customer might not be able to benefit from a scenario today, a lot of the good loan officers I've worked with in the past would ask them, like, okay, I know we've talked about we can't necessarily help you in this situation. Do you know anyone that we could potentially help? Anyone from your church, your work? You know anyone looking to buy a home? Like, every connection mattered, and they weren't wasting any connection as an opportunity to potentially reconnect with that person later or connect with someone else that they might know, right? So every lead's an opportunity, whether it could be converted at that particular time or not. And last but obviously not least is embrace the technology. Use it, don't fight it. Make sure that you're working in the way the enterprises put it together for you, and embrace the tools. And the loan officers that I've worked with, and I've worked with hundreds over the years that have done these, obviously been the most successful. Yeah. Well, going into technology, you moved from Wyndham over into Relcu, and
you guys have built an experience from a CRM standpoint that kind of gives you all the things that you were dreaming of from a loan officer's perspective or a management perspective. What makes Relcu different than some of the other CRMs that are out there?
Well, I think the first bullet point is the most crucial one, right? In that I had like 5 different systems that I was managing the components that Relcu's got out of the box and embedded. I had Velocify for lead management. I had Zoom Phone and I was using a separate marketing automation system, which was Marketing Cloud or Active Campaign. I had the loan officers were doing all kinds of different things, using Excel in a lot of cases to deliver initial rate quotes. We were using UiPath for some workflow automation processes. We were using Compass for loan pipeline management. So it's having one singular story of customer communication on officers' behavior was virtually impossible in an environment that's that disparate, right? So unless you have it all in a singular, cohesive, unified ecosystem, which is what Relcu provides, it's really difficult to optimize on your loan officer behaviors, on your consumer communication, on your inbound and outbound strategy. And all of that stuff is crucial to drive those key points we talked about earlier, which is lead conversions and ROI on spend. So if you're trying to piece that story together across 5, 6 different systems, it's really difficult to get the highest return on your marketing investment as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Right. And that is the biggest thing that makes Relcu unique, is that all of that stuff comes embedded into the system and can all be managed and communicating with itself in place.
Very good. So wrapping it up, from a consumer preference, when you're thinking about what does the consumer want today when they're hearing from a mortgage company, we found give them leads. First thing is leads expect you to follow up. I mean, they're going through a questionnaire, they're going through a form, they're submitting information, they're expecting to hear from somebody, maybe not as many people, but somebody. So provide them something of value, provide them something that's unique. Could be your rates, could be rate alerts. We feel like reviews matter. Building that trust, Trip talked about trust a lot. Building that trust early and quickly is key. That gives them the confidence to move forward with you. So that means getting your reviews in front of them on your website in some sort of text message campaign, email campaign, whatever. And then video. It's really changed how we do things over here at Banking Bridge. Introducing your brand via video, introducing your LOs via video, introducing proposals via video. There's lots of BombBomb, Vidyard, Loom, lots of great tools now for selling video, for video sales. So use those. Anything you would add to that, Trip?
No, I think you nailed it, Jimmy. I mean, it's all about transparency and trust, right? And the more tools you can give your customer, provide that for your loan officers, the more successful you're going to be, and the better those relationships are going to be solidified.
Mm-hmm. I agree. So if people are interested, they want to talk to Trip, they have questions about leads, they have questions about what can the CRM do?
We did have a couple of questions that came through, Jim. 2 minutes left, I think. So I don't know if you want to take those or not, or if you want to wrap up.
Yeah, let's do it. Go ahead.
So it looks like we got a question from Ed Powell. I'm surprised you didn't ask me what I would do with $1 million. He wanted to ask if I notice a change in lead quality throughout the days of the week. Not typically, not per day during the week, but you definitely notice it week to week. And what I would typically do is run my numbers every week and then look at the trending as they change from week to week. So trending analysis is really important. So like, what's this week look like versus last week and the week before and the week prior? And you have to look at different maturation cycles per metric, right? So your credit pull rate takes less time to mature than your lock rate, and your contact rate takes less time to mature than your credit pull rate, right? So you're looking at trending by provider on a per week basis to figure out how you might need to shift your spend based upon your week to week trending. That's the way I would typically do it. And you would see the quality changing on a per week basis, but not typically a per day basis. I think that's too much per day. It looks like we got a question from Justin on, can you give me your definition of quality lead? I'm going to keep this really simple. A quality lead is a high converting lead. How many leads do you have to buy to how many locks do you have to get? It's as simple as that.
And usually a lead provider doesn't change the quality, right? It's consistent. Whatever you get for the first 100 is probably predictable for the next 500. Does that sound right?
Well, sometimes it's like your larger, like higher brand recognition lead providers typically are a lot more consistent with their volume and their conversion rates. But some of your smaller lead providers that are out there sometimes will drive a ton of volume. And again, that typically means that they're driving a lot of affiliate traffic and conversion rates will come down, right? So it's your non-providers, especially ones that are driving leads through affiliates, are typically the ones that will fluctuate in volume and conversions the most, right? He's saying, I'm asking with regard to the overload of poor leads. Are poor leads one? It's typically the ones that are not interested, to answer your question. So he asked if poor leads were the ones that aren't qualified or the ones that are not interested. I'd much rather have a person that was interested in a mortgage that didn't qualify, because that means that that lead provider was marketing with the right intent. And that person clicked on that ad or keyed in a search term that was specific to them getting a mortgage. Or that affiliate that did that was marketing in a way that you know that that customer was inquiring about a mortgage. A lot of lead providers will buy affiliate volume from insurance providers and auto loan providers and personal loan providers and payday loans, and it's crazy where they'll get leads to try and turn profit and resell those leads as mortgage leads. So interest was far more important to me than qualification. I'd take a non-qualified lead over a not interested lead all day.
Yeah. Great. If interested, reach out to Trip at Relcu, and we'll wrap up this webinar. Thanks for everybody for participating. You'll get a recording via email, and then we're looking forward to our next webinar in April. Trip, thanks again for joining.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy. Thanks everyone for joining. Sorry for the connectivity issues.